I didn't expect a single sentence to change how I saw my own family. We were sitting together at lunch. Nothing dramatic, just another family gathering. And then my mom looked straight at me and said, "You need to stop relying on this family." No argument, no explanation, just that. Everyone went quiet. No one defended me. No one even looked surprised. In that moment, I realized something painful. I wasn't part of the family anymore. So I did exactly what she asked. I stopped relying on them. But what no one expected was what walking away would actually cost them. And once you hear what I took with me when I left, you'll understand why they tried to stop me. I didn't wake up that morning thinking anything was wrong. It was supposed to be a normal family lunch, the kind you don't overthink, the kind where you show up, smile, eat, and leave feeling tired but relieved that you did your part. I remember standing in my kitchen, adjusting my jacket, reminding myself not to be late. I even brought dessert. I always did. Not because anyone asked, but because that had quietly become my role. At the time, I didn't realize this lunch would be the moment everything finally snapped. When I arrived, everything felt familiar. The same table, the same chairs, the same casual conversations that skim the surface but never go deeper. My mom was already seated, scrolling on her phone. A few other family members were there too, talking about work, money, plans, things people discuss when they assume someone else will always pick up the slack. I sat down, placed the dessert on the table, and listened. That's when I noticed something subtle but important. No one asked how I was doing. Not how I'd been holding up. Not how work was going. Not whether I was tired. I told myself I was imagining it. I always did. Looking back, the silence should have warned me before the words ever came. Halfway through the meal, the conversation shifted. It always does. Someone mentioned expenses. Someone else sighed about how hard things were getting. Then, casually, almost carelessly, my mom looked up at me. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't sound angry. She sounded decided. She said, "You need to stop relying on this family." Just like that. No build-up. No explanation. No concern. The table went quiet. And what happened next hurt more than the sentence itself. No one corrected her. No one asked what she meant. No one looked shocked. They just kept eating. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a bad choice of words. This was something they had already agreed on without me in the room. I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. Because something inside me had gone very still. I replayed her words in my head. Stop relying on the family. It sounded strange, almost backwards. Because the truth was, I wasn't relying on them at all. In fact, I was the one they leaned on, and they all knew it. I paid for things no one talked about. I covered gaps when money ran short. I handled problems quietly, so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. And yet, sitting there, I was being spoken to like a burden. I looked around the table, hoping, just for a second, that someone would catch my eye, that someone would acknowledge how wrong this felt. No one did. That silence told me everything. In that moment, I realized I had mistaken responsibility for belonging. I finished my meal slowly. I thanked everyone just like I always did. I picked up my empty plate, washed it, and put it away. On the outside, nothing looked different. On the inside, something had already ended. As I grabbed my coat, my mom didn't stop me. No one did. They assumed I'd cool off. They assumed I'd forget. They assumed I'd keep playing the same role. But walking to my car, I made a decision that felt surprisingly calm. If they believed, I was relying on them. I would make sure they never felt that way again. And once I stopped doing what I'd been quietly doing for years, they finally noticed who had really been carrying the weight. I didn't leave that lunch angry. That's what surprised me the most. I drove home with both hands steady on the wheel, eyes forward, heart calm in a way that didn't feel normal. No racing thoughts, no tears, just this quiet clarity settling in like fog lifting all at once. Because once someone tells you who they think you are, you finally see the role you've been playing. And my role had never been the one who needed help. From the outside, my life looked fine. Stable job, paid bills, no dramatic crises. I didn't call anyone panicking or asking for favors. I handled things, always had. But inside my family, I was something else entirely. I was the fixer. When something broke, I handled it. When money got tight, I adjusted. When tension rose, I smoothed it over so no one had to feel uncomfortable. Not loudly, not for praise, quietly. That's how it starts. You don't become the reliable one overnight. You get trained into it. Every family has a system, even if no one admits it. In ours, my mom controlled the temperature. She didn't yell. She didn't explode. She withdrew. And when she did, everyone scrambled to get back in her good graces. You didn't confront that. You adapted to it. My dad stayed neutral. He believed avoiding conflict was the same thing as peace. He focused on small talk, stayed busy, and told himself it wasn't his place to step in. And my siblings, they learned early that things just worked out. Because I made sure they did. I told myself that was love. That this was what being a good daughter looked like. You don't keep score. You don't ask for credit. You just step up and move on. But here's the part no one warns you about. There's a line between helping and being expected to help. And once you cross it, your effort disappears. It becomes background noise, something people assume will always be there until it is. So when my mom said I was relying on the family, it didn't just sting. It exposed something much deeper. We weren't living in the same reality. In theirs, I was taking. In mine, I was holding everything together. And once that disconnect becomes clear, you can't unsee it. That's when I realized something uncomfortable. They didn't see my support as generosity. They saw it as obligation. Something I owed. And the moment they felt even slightly aware of how much they depended on me, they rewrote the story, so they wouldn't have to feel that discomfort. That lunch wasn't about me needing independence. It was about them needing control. Control over the narrative. Control over the balance. Control over the idea that they were the ones giving, even when the evidence said otherwise. When I got home, my apartment felt different. Not lonely, quiet, honest. I set my bag down and stood there longer than I expected. No distractions. No one asking for anything. Just me and the truth I'd been avoiding for years. I hadn't been included in this family system because I belonged. I had been included because I was useful. And that realization changed what I did next. I didn't rant. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post anything dramatic. I walked into my bedroom and pulled out a suitcase. Not to leave forever. Not to run. But to draw a line. Because when you stop carrying people who never plan to carry you back, the shift doesn't start with an argument. It starts with a decision. And the moment I made mine, everything they depended on quietly began to unravel. I didn't pack in a rush. That's the first thing I noticed. Every movement felt slow, deliberate, like my body already knew what my mind was still catching up to. Folding clothes, lining them up neatly, choosing what stayed and what went, it wasn't emotional. It was grounding. Because for the first time in a long while, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. And what I chose to do next wasn't dramatic. It was methodical. I zipped the suitcase closed and sat on the edge of my bed for a moment. The room was quiet. No phone buzzing. No voices in my head telling me what I should do. Then I opened my laptop. The screen lit up the room with that familiar glow, and suddenly the fog cleared even more. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for facts. Facts have a way of cutting through emotional confusion. I started opening tabs I hadn't thought twice about in years. Accounts I'd set up once and never revisited. Automatic payments that ran so smoothly, they barely registered as decisions anymore. Utilities. Maintenance. Subscriptions. Emergency fixes. Things that kept life comfortable for people who rarely noticed the work behind them. One by one, the numbers came into focus. And that's when the exhaustion hit. Not shock, not anger, recognition. This wasn't help anymore. This was infrastructure. I had become the system. The quiet safety net that allowed everyone else to live as if things just worked out. Not because they planned well, but because someone else absorbed the impact when they didn't. It was me. I stared at the totals longer than I expected, not because I regretted them, but because I finally understood the cost. Not just money. Energy. Time. Mental space. Years of it. And yet, at that lunch table, I was told I was the one relying on them. That was the moment something clicked into place. This wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about teaching anyone a lesson. It was about alignment. If they truly believed I depended on the family, then the most honest thing I could do was stop participating in a system built on denial. So I started making changes. Quiet ones. I clicked into settings, found autopay, reviewed recurring charges. No speeches. No warnings. Just confirmation screens and email receipts. Each click felt like a slow exhale I didn't realize I'd been holding. Cancelled. Paused. Ended. Not everything at once, just enough to return responsibility to where it belonged. I wasn't taking anything away. I was giving it back. When I closed the laptop, the apartment felt different again. Lighter, still quiet, but this time intentional. I sat there in the dark, city lights glowing through the window, fully aware that no one at that lunch table had any idea what had just shifted. They thought the moment had passed. They thought this was about hurt feelings. They thought things would reset like they always did. They were wrong. Because when support disappears quietly, the shock doesn't come immediately. It comes later, when the system fails. I went to bed that night and slept better than I had in months. No anxiety, no rehearsed conversations, no mental checklist of who might need what tomorrow. Just rest. And that's when I knew this wasn't impulsive. It was overdue. What they felt days later wasn't abandonment. It was reality catching up. It took 3 days. 3 quiet, uninterrupted days where my phone stayed still and my life continued exactly as planned. I went to work. I made dinner. I slept well. That alone told me something important. If anyone had truly been worried about me, I would have heard from them sooner. But when the silence finally broke, it didn't sound like concern, it sounded like panic. My phone rang while I was making coffee. I glanced at the screen and saw my brother's name. I let it ring one extra time before answering. "What did you do?" he snapped, skipping hello entirely. I didn't respond right away. I took a sip, set the mug down, and waited. "The cabin's freezing," he continued. "The heat's off. The internet's gone. Mason was supposed to stay there this weekend." There it was. Not "how are you?" Not "are you okay?" Just inconvenience. That's when I understood. They hadn't noticed my absence. They'd noticed the impact. "I stopped paying for things I don't use," I said calmly. There was a pause on the other end, a short one, the kind that happens when someone doesn't expect resistance. "Are you serious right now?" he said. "Yes," I replied. No edge, no apology, just truth. He launched into it then. Family responsibility. Overreacting. How I was being dramatic. Funny how those words only appear when comfort disappears. When he finally ran out of steam, I reminded him of one simple thing. "You told me to stop relying on the family," I said. "So I did." Then I hung up. The next message came from my dad. Not a call. A voicemail. His voice was soft, careful. The way people speak when they want resolution without confrontation. "Let's talk this out like adults," he said. That phrase stuck with me. Because adults don't avoid responsibility and call it peace. And this wasn't about talking. It was about restoring balance on their terms. 2 days later, it escalated. An envelope appeared in my mailbox. Thick, official. Inside were legal papers, claims of confusion, emotional pressure, a request to review property ownership. Filed by my mother. No call. No conversation. Just control, reasserted the only way she knew how. I sat at my kitchen counter reading the papers twice, then a third time, not shaking, not upset. Focused. Because now this wasn't emotional anymore. It was procedural. So I did the one thing I hadn't needed to do in years. I called my lawyer. He skimmed the documents, flipped a page, and paused. Then he looked up at me. "They just triggered the reversion clause," he said. "The what?" I asked. "The clause you signed years ago. If ownership is contested or pressure is applied, the property automatically reverts back to you." I blinked. "So the cabin is mine?" "Yes," he said, "effective immediately." No court battle. No shouting. No chaos. Just consequences. I sat back, letting that settle. They hadn't tried to understand. They tried to regain control. And in doing so, they handed me something they never expected to lose. What came next wasn't loud, but it was final. I suggested we meet in public. Not because I was afraid, but because public spaces have a way of keeping people honest. No slammed doors, no dramatic exits, just words that have to stand on their own. We chose a small diner near our old neighborhood, vinyl booths, buzzing lights, the kind of place where conversations stay contained. I arrived early. They arrived together. My mom walked in first, stiff and composed. My dad followed, quiet as ever. My brothers trailed behind them, one pale, the other already irritated. No one hugged me. No one smiled. We slid into the booth, like strangers forced into the same frame. My mom didn't waste time. "This has gone far enough," she said. "You've made your point." I looked at her calmly. "I didn't file anything," I replied. "You did." She scoffed. "You blindsided us, cutting everything off without warning." "I didn't expect anything from you," I said. "That's the difference." I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table. Not legal documents. Records. Years of payments. Rounded totals. Quiet support no one ever questioned. My dad flipped a page and froze. "You paid all of this?" he asked. "Yes." Stephen's voice dropped. "For everyone?" "Yes." The silence stretched. Even the hum of the diner felt loud. Bobby tried to laugh it off. "So what? You think this makes you some kind of hero?" I shook my head. No, I said, it makes me done. Then I placed one more paper on top of the folder. The transfer agreement. Highlighted. The moment you contested this, I said evenly, everything reverted back to me, automatically. My mom stared at the page. And then her face went blank. Not angry. Not hurt. Empty. Like someone had just realized the ground beneath them wasn't solid anymore. For the first time in my life, she had nothing to say. That silence, that was the real announcement. I stood up, smoothing my coat. You told me to stop relying on the family, I said quietly. So now you'll have to rely on yourselves. No one followed me out. And for the first time, I didn't look back. People expect fallout to be loud. They imagine shouting matches, slammed doors, dramatic ultimatums. But that's not what happened after the diner. What followed was quieter. And somehow heavier. Because once the illusion breaks, everyone has to adjust to the truth. There were no angry voicemails that night, no frantic calls, just space, an unfamiliar kind of space that settled in slowly. Without the quiet support I'd always provided, things didn't fall apart all at once. They just became real. Bills didn't disappear. Plans required coordination. Problems needed actual solutions. No one could casually say, "We'll figure it out later" anymore. Later had arrived. My dad tried again first. This time it was an email. Short, careful. No accusations, no guilt, just a line about working through some changes. It read like someone who'd been walking on a moving walkway that suddenly stopped. I didn't reply right away. Not because I was angry, but because I wasn't responsible for cushioning his discomfort anymore. Stephen sent a message too. Long, rambling, full of phrases like miscommunication, and we all played a part. The kind of words people use when they want closure without accountability. I didn't argue. I didn't correct him. I told him I needed space. Real space. Not the polite kind where everyone pretends nothing happened. Bobby went silent. No jokes. No sarcasm. No messages. Silence suited him better when there was nothing to spin. And my mom. Nothing at all. No calls, no texts, just absence. The kind that usually meant she was recalibrating, deciding whether control could be regained or if retreat was the better option. I didn't chase either outcome. For the first time, I let the distance sit exactly where it landed. What surprised me most wasn't their reaction, it was mine. My mornings felt slower. My evenings felt quieter. I wasn't checking my phone with that low-level anxiety anymore. That constant question in the back of my mind, who's going to need something today? The weight didn't fall off all at once. It eased. Like my shoulders, finally remembering what neutral felt like. My lawyer confirmed everything was settled. No loose ends, no pending action. He asked if I wanted to pursue anything further. No, I said. I'm not interested in punishment, I'm interested in permanence. Justice doesn't always look like winning. Sometimes it looks like not being pulled back into the same cycle again. I started filling my time differently. Long walks. Late dinners without rushing. Decisions made without factoring in who might disapprove. Small freedoms you don't notice until they're yours again. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. And steadiness, I realized, was something I'd never been allowed to have before. The strangest part wasn't losing my family. It was realizing how much of myself I'd been carrying just to keep them comfortable. Once the noise faded, once the constant requests and expectations stopped, I had space to see things clearly, for the first time in years. And clarity changes everything. Without me quietly smoothing things over, my family didn't implode. They adjusted, slowly, awkwardly. They had to make decisions without leaning on me. They had to feel the weight of choices they used to outsource. Not in a dramatic way, in a real one. And that's when it hit me. They didn't lose a daughter. They lost a system. A system that had protected them from discomfort, consequences, and responsibility. For years, I'd mistaken usefulness for love. I thought being needed meant being valued. But once I stopped filling that role, the difference became obvious. People who value you stay curious about you. People who value what you provide panic when it's gone. I replayed moments from my childhood with a new lens. How often I'd been praised for being easy. How rarely I'd been asked what I wanted. How responsibility had been handed to me long before I was ready, and then treated as if I'd volunteered for it. I didn't resent my younger self. I understood her. She thought keeping the peace was the same as being safe. What I gained wasn't revenge. It was perspective. I could finally hear my own thoughts without filtering them through other people's expectations. I stopped pre-editing my life to make it easier for others to accept. And that kind of freedom is quiet, but powerful. I noticed how often I'd apologized for things that weren't wrong. For needing rest. For saying no. For wanting space. That stopped. Not all at once, but intentionally. And the more I practiced, the more natural it felt. I wasn't angry at my family anymore. Anger requires engagement. I was at peace. Peace doesn't demand explanation. It just exists. And that's when I realized something else. Walking away without guilt isn't cruel. Staying in a role that drains you just to avoid discomfort, that's what's unsustainable. And once you choose yourself, you don't need permission to stay chosen. The first real shockwave didn't come immediately. It came 3 days later, when my phone started blowing up. Texts, calls, emails, all from people I'd quietly supported for years. "Did you really do this?" My brother's voice snapped through the phone. "The cabin's frozen, the internet's gone, the heat is off. What did you do?" I let it ring a second longer than usual, calm, steady, collected. "I did exactly what you asked," I said finally. "I stopped relying on the family, that includes me." And just like that, the reality hit. They were panicked, not because they'd been cruel to me, not because they'd lost someone to anger or revenge. They were panicked because they'd lost convenience. Every quiet favor I'd offered, every bill I'd covered, every problem I'd fixed in the background, gone. And they had to face it themselves. It was subtle, but subtle can hurt more than drama. No screaming, no chaos, just the slow realization that someone they relied on wasn't there anymore. I read their messages, their desperate attempts to negotiate, to guilt me back into my old role. "I think we can work something out. Let's talk like adults. You don't need to do this alone." Funny, because for years, I had been doing everything alone, and they never noticed. Then came the official papers. Thick, formal, deliberate. My mom had triggered the reversion clause on the cabin property, thinking she could manipulate me. I read through them carefully. And smiled. No battle needed. No confrontation. Just the system I had quietly built years ago, protecting me from exactly this scenario. I called my lawyer. "They just triggered the clause," he said. "The cabin automatically reverts to you. No fight, no court, no drama. Clean and final." I leaned back, feeling a weight lift that I hadn't realized I was carrying. A week later, we met in a neutral space, a small diner. No shouting, No accusations. Just papers, receipts, and evidence of every silent effort I'd made over the years. I laid everything out. The bills I paid, the tuition, the maintenance, the trips, the gifts, the invisible work that had kept them afloat. Their faces, shock, confusion, and finally blankness. My mom, who had always held the calm authority, looked at me like she had no idea what to say next. No words, no defense, just silence. I smiled softly. "You told me to stop relying on the family," I said. "So now you'll have to rely on yourselves." And for the first time, I walked out without looking back. No drama, no vindictiveness, just a quiet, deliberate exit. Because the greatest impact isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the absence that speaks the loudest. Without me quietly holding everything together, they had to adjust. And I finally got to breathe and live on my own terms. For the first time in years, my mornings felt different. No urgent calls, no low-level panic over someone else's mess. I could drink my coffee without checking my phone 100 times. Evenings, quiet, peaceful, not lonely, just mine. The apartment no longer carried the weight of a family who expected me to silently fix everything. It was a strange kind of freedom. The same freedom that had terrified me when I first stepped out of the holiday lunch, back when I had packed my suitcase without a dramatic scene. No chaos, no shouting, just a clean line drawn, and now, months later, the line had held. I started filling my days differently. Long walks in the city. Quiet dinners I could enjoy without rushing. Decisions made without factoring in who might approve or who might get uncomfortable. For the first time, I was living in my own reality, not theirs. My phone still buzzed occasionally, of course. Dad with another careful email. Stephen sending long, rambling apologies that wanted closure without accountability. Bobby quiet, realizing humor couldn't fix everything. I didn't answer immediately, not because I was angry, but because I wasn't responsible for managing their discomfort anymore. The real shift wasn't the absence of conflict. It was the absence of obligation. No more background labor, no more quiet sacrifices to make everyone else comfortable. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was simply reclaiming the space I had always given away. The cabin, the bills, the quiet support, they were all symbols of a role I'd played for too long. And now I had stepped out of it. And what surprised me most? Life outside that role didn't explode. It didn't destroy my family. It exposed the truth. The illusion of control, the unspoken reliance, the expectation that I'd always be the one to quietly manage everything, it all came into focus. I finally understood something crucial. Growth isn't always dramatic. Justice isn't always loud. And strength, sometimes it looks like walking away without explanation, without guilt, without apology. If this story teaches anything, it's that boundaries matter. Not because they punish others. Not because they seek revenge. Because they protect you from being endlessly taken for granted. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand apologies. I didn't try to fix everyone else's reaction. I simply chose myself. And in that choice, I finally found calm, clarity, and control. The kind that no holiday lunch, no family expectation, and no subtle manipulation could ever take away.